I never thought a piece of paper could change my life. But when I watched my boss feed that compliance file into the shredder, I didn't just see documents being destroyed. I saw my entire future being ripped apart, strip by strip. What I didn't know then was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because that file, it wasn't just evidence. It was a loaded gun, and he had just pointed it straight at himself. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm about to tell you how I went from being a loyal employee to the reason a billionaire CEO is now facing federal prison time. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when greed meets consequences, when power meets justice, and when one woman decides that enough is enough. But before we dive deep into this, I need something from you. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to want to follow this story until the very end because what happened next, nobody saw it coming. Let me take you back to where it all started. 2 years ago, I was 31 years old, sitting in a cramped cubicle at a mid-level accounting firm, drowning in spreadsheets and dreaming of something bigger. I had my MBA. I had 7 years of experience in corporate compliance. I had ambition burning inside me like a fire that wouldn't go out. What I didn't have was opportunity. You know that feeling when you're good at what you do, but nobody notices. When you watch people with half your qualifications climb the ladder while you're stuck on the same rung year after year. That was my life. Every performance review, my manager would smile and say the same thing. "Great work, Sarah, keep it up." No promotion, no raise, just a pat on the head like I was a good dog doing tricks. I was frustrated, angry even. I would go home to my tiny apartment, look at my student loan statements, look at my bank account, and wonder what the point of all those years of education was. My younger sister was getting married. My parents were getting older. I wanted to help them. I wanted to prove to myself that I hadn't wasted my 20s buried in books and exams for nothing. Then one day, it happened. The email that would change everything. It came on a Wednesday morning. I remember because Wednesdays were always the slowest, most soul-crushing day of my week. The subject line read, "Opportunity at Titanium Global Investments." Titanium Global. Even if you don't follow the business world, you've probably heard of them. They were massive. A private equity firm that handled billions of dollars. The kind of company that got written about in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Their CEO, Richard Ashford, was a legend. Self-made billionaire. 43 years old. He'd built Titanium Global from nothing into one of the most powerful investment firms in the country. The email was from their head of HR. They'd found my resume on a professional networking site and wanted to interview me for a position as senior compliance officer. Senior. Not entry-level, not assistant. Senior. The salary they mentioned made my heart skip. It was almost 3 times what I was making. The benefits included things I'd only dreamed about. Stock options. Full health coverage, a company car allowance. I read that email 5 times. Then I read it again. Was this real? Was this some kind of scam? I looked up the HR director's name. She was real. Her LinkedIn profile showed she'd been with Titanium Global for 6 years. I looked up the company address. Real, everything checked out. My hands were shaking when I typed my response. Professional, enthusiastic but not desperate. I hit send and then I waited. The rest of that day crawled by like time had turned to honey. I couldn't focus on anything. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. By 5 o'clock, I had convinced myself it was a mistake, that they'd sent that email to the wrong person, that I'd never hear back. But I did. The next morning, there was another email, an interview scheduled for Monday, in person, at their headquarters in downtown Manhattan. I was going to walk into one of those gleaming skyscrapers I'd only ever seen from the outside. I was going to meet with their executive team. This was happening. This was really happening. That weekend, I prepared like I was studying for the bar exam. I researched everything about Titanium Global, every deal they'd made, every article written about them, every interview Richard Ashford had ever given. I learned that he'd grown up poor, put himself through state college, worked his way up from being a junior analyst to founding his own firm at 30. The media loved him. He was charismatic, brilliant. He gave to charity. He spoke at conferences about ethical business practices and the responsibility of wealth. On paper, he was perfect, a role model, the kind of boss you'd be proud to work for. I remember watching an interview where he said, "Success without integrity is just failure waiting to happen." I thought, this is a man who gets it. This is someone I can respect. I bought a new suit for the interview, navy blue, professional. It cost more than I wanted to spend, but I told myself it was an investment. I practiced my answers in the mirror. I barely slept Sunday night. Monday morning, I took the train into the city 2 hours early because I was terrified of being late. The Titanium Global building was exactly what you'd imagine, all glass and steel, reaching into the sky like a monument to success. The lobby had marble floors and modern art that probably cost more than my annual salary. I gave my name to the receptionist, and she smiled at me like I was already important. A few minutes later, someone came to escort me upstairs. The executive floor was on the 42nd level, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the entire city. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was screaming. This could be my life. This could be where I worked every day. Everything I'd struggled for, everything I'd sacrificed, it was all leading to this moment. The interview lasted 2 hours. I met with the CFO first, then the head of legal, then the HR director. They asked tough questions. I gave good answers. I could feel the chemistry, that clicking sensation when you know you're impressing people. They nodded at the right times. They smiled. They asked follow-up questions that showed genuine interest. And then Richard Ashford walked in. I'd seen his pictures, of course, but in person he had this presence. Confident, commanding. He shook my hand firmly and sat down across from me. For the next 30 minutes we talked, not just about work, about philosophy, about what compliance really meant, about protecting companies while fostering growth. He said something I'll never forget. He looked me right in the eyes and said, "Sarah, compliance isn't about checking boxes. It's about having the courage to say no when everyone else wants to say yes. It's about being the person who sleeps well at night because they did the right thing. Do you have that kind of courage?" I said yes, I meant it. He smiled and stood up. "Good, because that's what I need. Someone who won't be intimidated. Someone who will tell me the truth even when it's hard." He shook my hand again. "We'll be in touch very soon." I floated out of that building. I actually felt like my feet weren't touching the ground. On the train ride home, I let myself dream. A new apartment, paying off my loans, taking my parents on a real vacation, finally feeling like I'd made it. 3 days later, they offered me the job. I accepted before the HR director finished reading the offer letter. I gave notice at my old company. My manager looked disappointed for about 5 seconds, then shrugged and said, "Good luck." No counteroffer, no attempt to keep me. That's how much I'd mattered there. My last 2 weeks dragged by, but I didn't care. I was leaving. I was moving up. I was going to work for one of the most successful companies in America, directly protecting their interests, making real money, finally living the life I'd worked so hard for. I started at Titanium Global on a Monday in September. The leaves were just beginning to change colors. I remember thinking it felt symbolic. A new season, a new chapter, a new me. They gave me an office, an actual office with a door and a window, my own assistant, business cards with my name and title. I kept staring at them. Sarah Mitchell, Senior Compliance Officer. It was real. The first week was orientation, meeting the team, learning the systems, understanding the structure of the deals Titanium Global handled. They invested in everything: tech startups, real estate, manufacturing, retail chains, billions of dollars moving through complex transactions that I was responsible for vetting and approving. It was exciting, challenging, exactly what I'd wanted. Everyone was nice, welcoming. The office culture seemed great. People worked hard, but they laughed too. There were company lunches, happy hours. I started making friends, started feeling like I belonged. My parents were so proud. My sister kept telling everyone her big sister worked for Titanium Global now. For the first time in years, I felt successful. I felt valued. Richard would stop by my office sometimes, just casual check-ins, asking how I was settling in, if I had everything I needed. He seemed genuinely interested in my opinion on things. He'd bring me into meetings with investment teams, introduce me as the person who keeps us honest, and actually listen when I raised concerns. I thought, this is what a good boss looks like. This is what I'd been missing. Everything was perfect for exactly 6 weeks. And then I found the first crack. Small, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. Because that's what they hired me to do. That's what I was good at. Noticing the things that didn't quite add up. Seeing the numbers that didn't quite match. Finding the problems before they became disasters. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing documentation for a new acquisition. Titanium Global was buying a controlling stake in a pharmaceutical distribution company. Standard deal, or so it seemed. But as I went through the financial disclosures, something caught my eye. A payment. $2 million listed as a consulting fee to a company I didn't recognize. Now, consulting fees aren't unusual, but $2 million is significant. And the company name, Helix Consulting LLC, didn't come up in any of my searches. No website, no public records, just a registered LLC in Delaware with a P.O. Box address. Red flag. Not necessarily a disaster, but definitely something that needed explanation. I did what I was supposed to do. I sent an email to the deal team asking for more information about Helix Consulting. What services did they provide? Who authorized the payment? Could I see the contract and scope of work? Basic questions. Standard compliance procedure. I sent the email at 3 in the afternoon and went back to my other work. At 6:30, I was getting ready to leave for the day when my phone rang. Richard's direct line. My boss, the CEO, calling me personally. I picked up, feeling that little flutter of nervousness you get when the top executive wants to talk to you. Sarah, hey, you still in the office? Can you come up to my floor for a minute? Want to chat about something? His tone was casual, friendly even. No hint of anything wrong. I said of course and headed upstairs. His executive suite was even more impressive than the rest of the building. His corner office was bigger than my first apartment. The view was insane. You could see the whole city stretching out in every direction. He was sitting at his desk, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. The picture of a hardworking executive at the end of a long day. He smiled when I walked in and gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sarah, thanks for coming up. I wanted to talk to you about your email, the one about the Helix Consulting payment. I nodded. Sure, I just had some standard questions about the documentation. Nothing major, just want to make sure everything's properly filed. He nodded slowly. Then he leaned back in his chair and his expression changed. Not angry, not exactly, but something else. Something I couldn't quite read. Here's the thing, he said. That payment is part of a confidential arrangement, very sensitive. The kind of thing that if our competitors knew about it could jeopardize the entire deal. You understand? I understood that deals could be sensitive. That was normal. But I also understood that compliance documentation didn't care about sensitivity. I understand, I said carefully. But I still need to see the contract and verify the payment is properly categorized for regulatory purposes. It's standard procedure. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. But it wasn't the warm smile from my interview. It was different. Colder. Sarah, I hired you because you're smart, because you're thorough. But I also need you to understand how things work at this level. Some transactions require discretion. Trust. We bring you into the inner circle, we need to know you're a team player. Team player? I'd heard that phrase before. It was usually code for don't ask questions. But asking questions was literally my job. Richard, I am a team player. That's why I want to make sure everything's documented correctly. If regulators ever audit this deal, we need to have our paperwork in order. That protects you. That protects the company. He stood up and walked over to the window, hands in his pockets. The documentation is fine. I've personally reviewed it. What I need from you is to approve the deal and move forward. Can you do that for me? It was phrased as a question, but his tone made it clear it was more of an instruction. My stomach felt weird, like something was off, but I was new. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe this was just how things worked at this level. Can I at least see the contract? I asked. Just for my own files, then I can sign off. He turned back to me. The contract is privileged, attorney-client work product, but I can assure you everything is legitimate. I just need you to trust me on this one. Okay. And there it was, the moment, the fork in the road. I could push back, insist on seeing the documentation, stand my ground on principle, or I could let it go, trust my boss, be the team player, keep my amazing new job that I'd only had for 6 weeks. I was still on probation technically, still proving myself. I hesitated. He saw it. Sarah, look, I know you're by the book. I respect that. I really do. But you're part of the executive team now. Sometimes that means trusting your colleagues. I promise you there's nothing wrong with this payment. It's all legitimate business expenses. I just can't show you the contract right now because of the sensitivity. Give it a few months after the deal closes. I'll walk you through everything. Deal. What would you have done? I'm serious. Put yourself in my shoes. New job, dream position. The CEO personally asking you to trust him, promising everything was fine. Would you have risked it all over one payment, over what might have been nothing? I made my choice. God help me, I made the wrong choice, I nodded. Okay, I trust you. His smile came back, the warm one. He clapped me on the shoulder. That's my girl, I knew I hired the right person. Don't worry, Sarah, you're going to go far here, I'm going to make sure of it. I went home that night and tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing, that I was being paranoid. That Richard Ashford, the billionaire philanthropist who gave speeches about integrity, wouldn't lie to me. I almost believed it. Almost. But that little voice in the back of my head, the one that had made me good at my job in the first place, kept whispering. Something's wrong. Something's very wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. I didn't know that $2 million payment was just the tip of the iceberg, that beneath the surface was something so much darker, so much bigger, and that my decision to let it go had just made me complicit. I didn't know that in a few months that choice would haunt me, that it would become the thing I regretted most. But I was about to find out, because once you see the first crack, you start noticing all the others, and Titanium Global had cracks everywhere, deep ones, the kind that don't just damage a building, the kind that bring the whole thing crashing down. I wish I could tell you that I forgot about that Helix consulting payment, that I moved on and everything went back to normal. But I couldn't. It sat in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't dig out. Every time I reviewed another deal, every time I signed off on another transaction, I thought about it. That $2 million, that company with no website, that contract I was never allowed to see. For 3 weeks, I tried to focus on other things. I did my job. I attended meetings. I smiled and laughed at office happy hours, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was rotting underneath the polished surface of Titanium Global. And then, almost by accident, I found proof that I wasn't crazy. It was late on a Tuesday night. Most people had gone home, but I was still in the office finishing up a compliance report. I needed some historical deal files for reference, so I went down to the records room. We kept physical copies of everything, old school style. Richard insisted on it. He said digital files could be hacked, but paper was secure. At the time, I thought it showed he was careful. Later, I'd understand the real reason. The records room was in the basement level. Rows and rows of filing cabinets and boxes, organized by year and deal name. I found the section I needed and started pulling files. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a box on the top shelf pushed way back with no label. Everything else was meticulously labeled. Every box, every file, but this one was blank. I should have left it alone. I should have grabbed my files and gone back to my office. But curiosity is a powerful thing. I pulled over a step stool and reached for the unmarked box. It was heavy. I brought it down and opened it. Inside were file folders, at least 30 of them, each one labeled with a company name I didn't recognize and a dollar amount. Helix Consulting LLC, $2 million. That was the first one I saw. My heart started beating faster. I pulled out the folder and opened it. Inside was a contract. The contract Richard had told me I couldn't see because it was privileged. I started reading. The contract was dated 3 months before I'd started at Titanium Global. It was an agreement between Titanium Global and Helix Consulting for advisory services related to regulatory approval facilitation. That was the official language. But as I read deeper, my stomach started to sink. The contract outlined payments to Helix Consulting, who would then engage with relevant regulatory officials to ensure favorable outcomes for pending acquisitions. Let me translate that for you. Bribes. They were paying Helix Consulting to bribe government regulators, to make sure Titanium Global's deals got approved even when they shouldn't have been. This wasn't consulting. This was corruption, and it was in writing. My hands were shaking as I put that folder down and picked up another one. Summit Advisory Group, $1,500,000. Same thing. Another shell company. Another contract for regulatory facilitation. Another set of payments that were clearly bribes dressed up in corporate language. I went through folder after folder, each one worse than the last. Payments to shell companies. Contracts that were obviously fraudulent. Documents that showed a pattern of systematic corruption going back years. There were at least 15 different shell companies, millions and millions of dollars, deals that had been approved by the SEC, by state regulators, by federal agencies, all because Titanium Global had paid people off. And every single contract had one signature at the bottom, Richard Ashford, my boss, the man who gave speeches about integrity, the philanthropist, the role model. He'd been running a massive bribery scheme right under everyone's noses. I sat on the floor of that records room for I don't know how long, just trying to process what I was looking at. This wasn't a small mistake. This wasn't a gray area. This was federal crime. Multiple federal crimes, wire fraud, bribery, probably money laundering. The kind of crimes that sent people to prison for decades. The kind of crimes that destroyed companies. And I worked here. I was the senior compliance officer. My job was to prevent exactly this kind of thing. If this ever came out, if regulators ever found these files, I would be implicated. People would ask how I didn't know, how I didn't catch it. My career would be over. My reputation would be destroyed. I might even face criminal charges myself. I thought about that conversation in Richard's office, the way he'd smiled at me, the way he'd called me a team player. He'd been testing me, seeing if I would push back or fall in line. And I'd fallen in line. I'd approved that deal without seeing the documentation. I'd trusted him, and now I was complicit. Part of me wanted to put everything back, pretend I'd never seen it, walk away and find a new job quietly before everything exploded. But I couldn't, because it wasn't just about me anymore. Those bribes had consequences, real consequences. Deals that should have been blocked had gone through. Companies that shouldn't have been approved had gotten regulatory clearance. Who knows what damage that had caused? What safety regulations had been ignored? What consumer protections had been bypassed? I took out my phone and started taking pictures. Every page of every contract, every document in every folder. My phone storage was almost full by the time I finished, but I got it all. Evidence. Proof. Then I carefully put everything back exactly how I'd found it. I pushed the unmarked box back onto the top shelf. I made sure nothing looked disturbed. My mind was racing as I went back to my office. What was I going to do with this? Who could I tell? If I went to Richard, he'd know I'd found his secret files. He'd fire me, probably threaten me, maybe worse. If I went to the police, I'd need more than just photos. I'd need to be sure. I'd need to protect myself. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone on the nightstand with all those photos on it. Evidence of crimes that could bring down a billionaire. That could destroy one of the biggest investment firms in the country. And I was the only one who knew. The weight of that knowledge felt like it was crushing my chest. The next morning, I went into work like nothing had happened. I smiled at people in the hallway. I answered emails. I attended a meeting about a new retail acquisition. And all the while, I was watching Richard, really watching him. He was charming as always, confident, making jokes, talking about quarterly projections. Looking at him, you'd never guess he was a criminal. But I knew now, I knew what he really was. I spent the next week being very, very careful. I did my job. I didn't ask suspicious questions. I didn't go back to the records room. But I also started preparing. I made copies of the photos and stored them in 3 different places. A cloud drive, a flash drive in my apartment, an email draft I sent to myself. I documented everything I could remember about the Helix Consulting deal and the conversation in Richard's office. Dates, times, exact words he'd said. I also started researching. What were my legal obligations? If I knew about illegal activity, was I required to report it? Could I be prosecuted for staying silent? The answers I found terrified me. Yes, I could potentially be held liable. As a compliance officer, I had a duty to report. If I knew about crimes and said nothing, I could be considered an accessory. But I also knew that whistleblowing came with risks. People who reported corporate fraud often ended up destroyed, blacklisted, sued. Their lives turned inside out. Companies had armies of lawyers. Billionaires like Richard had connections everywhere. Politicians, judges, media figures. If I came forward, he could bury me. I was trapped. If I stayed silent, I was complicit in federal crimes. If I spoke up, I'd be going to war with one of the most powerful men in the country. There was no good option, no safe choice, just different kinds of danger. I think Richard could sense something had changed. He started watching me more closely, stopping by my office more often, asking pointed questions about what I was working on. One day he came in and closed the door behind him. That's when I knew he suspected something. "Sarah," he said, sitting down across from my desk. "We need to talk. I've been getting some feedback from the team. People are saying you've been distracted lately. Not yourself. Everything okay?" His tone was friendly, concerned even, but I could see something else in his eyes, suspicion, maybe even threat. "Everything's fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just been busy with the Westfield deal. Lots of documentation to review." He nodded slowly. "Right, the Westfield deal. How's that going? Any concerns I should know about?" There it was. He wasn't really asking about my well-being. He was fishing, trying to figure out what I knew, what I was thinking. "No concerns," I said. "Everything looks good so far." He studied my face. I forced myself to meet his eyes, to not look away, to not show fear. After a long moment, he smiled. "Good, that's good. You know, Sarah, I've been really impressed with your work. You've adapted well to how we do things here. A lot of people struggle with that. They get too caught up in bureaucracy and forget the big picture. But you get it. You understand that sometimes you have to trust your team, trust the process." Every word felt like a test, like he was trying to convince himself that I was still under control, that I hadn't found anything, that I was still the compliant employee who'd backed down in his office 2 months ago. I smiled back. "I appreciate that, Richard. I've learned a lot here." "Good," he said, standing up. "Keep up the great work. And Sarah, if you ever have any concerns about anything, you come to me first, okay? Before talking to anyone else, I'm here for you. That's what leadership is about, open communication." The message was clear. Don't go outside the company. Don't talk to regulators. Don't talk to lawyers. Come to him where he could control the narrative, control me. "Of course," I said. He left, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. He was warning me, subtly but clearly. He knew something was different. Maybe he didn't know I'd found the files, but he suspected I was a risk. And Richard Ashford didn't tolerate risks. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, walking on eggshells, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I needed help. I needed advice from someone who understood corporate law and whistleblower protections. I started researching attorneys who specialized in this kind of case. I found a firm that had successfully represented whistleblowers in major financial fraud cases. I sent them an encrypted email with a brief overview of what I'd found. No names, no company details yet. Just the basics. They responded within 24 hours. They wanted to meet. They said what I was describing sounded like a significant case, that I needed legal protection before going forward. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. I told my assistant I had a dental appointment and would be out of the office that afternoon. But I never made it to that meeting, because 3 days before I was supposed to meet with the lawyers, everything fell apart. Richard found out that I knew. I still don't know how. Maybe he had IT monitoring my email. Maybe someone saw me in the records room. Maybe he just put the pieces together, but he knew, and he decided to act. It was a Friday. I came into work and immediately felt something was wrong. People weren't making eye contact with me. My assistant looked nervous when I said good morning. There was an email in my inbox from Richard's executive assistant. "Richard would like to see you in his office at 10 a.m. Please bring all files related to the Meridian acquisition." The Meridian acquisition. That was one of the deals I'd found in the unmarked box, one of the ones with a shell company payment. My blood went cold. This was it. He was going to confront me. I thought about running, just grabbing my purse and walking out. But where would I go? I didn't have the lawyers yet. I didn't have protection. And if I ran, it would confirm everything he suspected. So I did the only thing I could think of. I gathered all my evidence, the photos on my phone, the documentation I'd been keeping, and I put together a file, a compliance file. Everything I'd found, organized and dated, proof of the bribery scheme, proof that I'd discovered it and reported my concerns internally. My insurance policy. At 10 o'clock, I walked up to Richard's office with that file under my arm and my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. His assistant waved me in. Richard was sitting at his desk, but he wasn't alone. The company's head of legal was there. Marcus Chen, a shark in an expensive suit who'd been with Titanium Global since the beginning. And there was someone else I didn't recognize, a private security consultant I'd later learn. "Sarah, come in, close the door," Richard said. His friendly mask was gone, his face was hard, cold. I closed the door and stood there holding my file. "Sit down," he said. It wasn't a request. I sat. The three men looked at me like I was something they'd found on the bottom of their shoe. "We have a problem, Sarah," Richard said. "A serious problem. It's come to my attention that you've been accessing files you had no authorization to view, taking photographs of confidential company documents, and potentially preparing to disclose privileged information to outside parties. Do you want to explain yourself?" My mouth went dry. How did he know about the photos? Had he been monitoring my phone? My stomach turned. "I found evidence of illegal activity," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Bribery of federal regulators, multiple shell companies being used to funnel payments. As compliance officer, I have a legal obligation to report that." Richard laughed, actually laughed. "You found evidence? You mean you illegally accessed secure files in a restricted area? You photographed confidential attorney-client privileged documents. You violated your employment agreement and multiple federal laws regarding corporate espionage. That's what you did." Marcus, the lawyer, leaned forward. "Ms. Mitchell, you're in serious legal jeopardy right now. What you've done constitutes theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty. We could have you arrested today, but Mr. Ashford is willing to be generous. If you hand over all copies of the documents you stole, sign a comprehensive NDA, and resign effective immediately, we'll let you walk away. No criminal charges, a severance package, a neutral reference. You get to move on with your life." It was a trap. If I signed their NDA, I'd be legally barred from ever talking about what I'd found. The evidence would disappear. Richard would win. But if I refused, they'd bury me in legal action, criminal charges, civil suits. I'd be fighting in court for years, spending money I didn't have on lawyers. "I'm not signing anything," I heard myself say. "What I found is evidence of federal crimes, bribery, fraud, wire fraud. You can threaten me all you want, but that doesn't change what you did." Richard's expression darkened. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Sarah. No idea who you're up against. You think you're going to be some hero, some whistleblower. Let me tell you what happens to people like you. They get crushed, destroyed. Nobody will hire you. Nobody will believe you. I have lawyers who cost more per hour than you make in a week. I have friends in every regulatory agency. I have senators on speed dial. You are nobody. Just another disgruntled employee with delusions of grandeur." He stood up and walked around his desk, looming over me. "Give me your phone and give me that file, now." I clutched the file tighter. "No." His face turned red, actually red. I'd never seen him angry before. The mask had completely slipped. This was the real Richard Ashford, not the philanthropist, not the inspiring CEO, just a criminal who'd been caught and was furious about it. "Marcus, call building security," he said. The lawyer pulled out his phone. Richard grabbed for my file. I pulled it back. He grabbed harder. We actually struggled over it for a moment, this absurd tug-of-war over a manila folder that contained the evidence of his crimes. And then he ripped it out of my hands. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," I said. My voice was shaking, but I meant every word. He laughed again. That cruel, dismissive laugh. "No, Sarah, you made the mistake. Coming in here with accusations, threatening me, this." He held up the file. "This is nothing. This proves nothing." And then he did it. The thing I still see in my nightmares. The thing that changed everything. He walked over to the corner of his office where there was a large industrial paper shredder. The kind that could handle dozens of pages at a time. He opened my compliance file, my carefully organized evidence, my proof, my insurance policy, and he started feeding it into the shredder. Page after page. The contracts I'd photographed and printed, the timelines I'd created, the organizational charts showing the shell companies, my written account of finding the files in the records room. Everything, destroyed, strip by strip. The shredder made this terrible grinding noise as it ate my evidence. No, I lunged forward, but the security consultant grabbed my arm, held me back. I could only watch as Richard shredded every single page. He was smiling while he did it, actually smiling. When the last page was gone, turned into confetti in the bin, he turned back to me. There, all better. Now, what was it you were saying about evidence? I was shaking, with rage, with fear, with disbelief at what had just happened. I have copies, I said. That's not the only file. His smile faded slightly. Then you'll give me those too, your phone, your computer, any cloud storage, all of it, or I'll have you arrested for corporate espionage before you leave this building. Mr. Ashford, Marcus said carefully. Perhaps we should. No, Richard cut him off. I'm done being patient, I'm done being nice. Sarah, you have two choices. Give me everything you took and resign, or I'll destroy you, not professionally, personally. I'll sue you for everything you have and everything you'll ever have. I'll make sure you spend the next decade in court. I'll prosecute you criminally. I'll tell every potential employer that you're a thief and a liar. Your life as you know it will be over. So what's it going to be? I thought about my parents, my sister, my tiny apartment and my student loans, my whole future. He could do everything he was threatening. He had the money, the power, the connections, and I was just me, one person with some photos on a phone and a story nobody might believe. But I also thought about those contracts, those bribes, those regulators who'd been paid off, the laws that had been broken, the trust that had been betrayed. If I walked away now, Richard won. He'd keep doing this, keep breaking the law, keep corrupting the system, and I'd have to live with knowing I could have stopped it and didn't. I need to use the bathroom, I said. Richard studied me for a moment, then nodded to the security guy. Go with her. Make sure she doesn't make any calls. So I walked to the executive bathroom with a private security consultant following me like I was a criminal. I locked myself in a stall and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I opened my email, found the draft I'd saved with the photos attached, and I changed the recipient. Not to the lawyers I'd been planning to meet, not to a journalist. I sent it to a tip line I'd found during my research, the FBI's Corporate Fraud Division. I typed one sentence in the body. Evidence of systematic bribery scheme by Titanium Global Investments CEO Richard Ashford. I am the compliance officer. I have proof. Please help. And I hit send, just as the security consultant banged on the bathroom door. Let's go, Ms. Mitchell. Time's up. I deleted my sent folder, cleared my recent activity, and I walked out. When I got back to Richard's office, I looked him right in the eyes. You win, I said. I'll resign. I'll sign your NDA. Just let me go. The triumph on his face was sickening. He actually thought he'd won, that he'd scared me into submission, that destroying my file had solved his problem. I signed their papers. I handed over my work phone and my laptop. I cleaned out my desk while the security consultant watched. I walked out of Titanium Global for the last time at 2:30 on a Friday afternoon. My career in shambles, my reputation destroyed. No job, no references, nothing. But I had one thing Richard didn't know about, an email sitting in an FBI inbox, a bomb waiting to explode. He'd made a mistake, a huge one. He'd let his arrogance blind him. He'd thought that shredding that file meant he was safe, that destroying my evidence meant destroying the threat. He was wrong, because the evidence was already out there, already in the hands of people who actually cared about justice. And shredding that file, that wasn't just destruction of evidence, that was obstruction of justice, a federal crime, on top of all the other federal crimes. Richard Ashford had just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy him. He just didn't know it yet. I sat in my apartment that night and cried, not delicate tears, ugly, shoulder-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. Everything I'd worked for was gone. 7 years of building a career, all those late nights studying, all those sacrifices, destroyed in one afternoon. I'd been escorted out of Titanium Global like a criminal. People I'd thought were friends had watched me leave and hadn't said a word, hadn't even made eye contact. The severance package Richard had given me was generous by normal standards, 6 months' salary, but it came with an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. I couldn't talk about Titanium Global, couldn't talk about anything I'd seen or done there. If I violated it, I'd owe them $5 million in liquidated damages. $5 million. Money I'd never have in my entire life. They'd made sure I'd be financially destroyed if I ever opened my mouth. But I'd already opened my mouth. That email to the FBI was out there, and I had no idea if anyone had even read it. No idea if they'd take it seriously. For all I knew, it had gone into some spam folder and would never be seen by human eyes. I'd thrown away my career on the hope that someone somewhere would care about what I'd found. My phone rang, my mother, I let it go to voicemail. She called again, and again. Finally, I answered. "Honey, what happened? Your sister said you left Titanium Global. Is everything all right?" Her voice was full of concern and confusion. How could I explain this? How could I tell her that her daughter, who she'd been so proud of, had just been fired from her dream job? "I'm fine, Mom," I lied. "It just wasn't a good fit. I'm going to take some time and figure out my next move." She wanted to know more, wanted to help, but I couldn't tell her anything. Couldn't tell anyone. The NDA made sure of that. And the knowledge of what I'd done, sending that email to the FBI, felt like a weight I had to carry alone. The weekend was the longest of my life. I kept checking my email, my personal email, hopping for something from the FBI, any kind of acknowledgement that they'd received my message, that someone was looking into it. Nothing, just silence. By Sunday night, I'd convinced myself it had been for nothing, that they'd ignored it, that Richard had won. Monday morning, I didn't have anywhere to go. No office. No job. I sat at my kitchen table in my pajamas drinking coffee and scrolling through job listings. But who was I kidding? Richard had connections everywhere. The finance world wasn't that big. Once word got out that I'd been fired from Titanium Global, that I'd signed an NDA, that there'd been issues with my employment, I'd be toxic. Nobody would hire me. I thought about leaving New York, starting over somewhere else. Maybe going back to school, maybe changing careers entirely, anything to escape the suffocating feeling that my life was over at 31. I was spiraling. I knew I was spiraling, but I couldn't stop. Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" A woman's voice, professional, serious. "Yes, who is this?" There was a pause. "Ms. Mitchell, my name is Agent Jennifer Torres. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Division. I'm calling about an email you sent to our tip line. Do you have a moment to talk?" My heart stopped. Actually felt like it stopped beating for a full second. "Yes," I managed to say. "I have time." "Good. I need to ask you some questions about the allegations you made regarding Titanium Global Investments and Richard Ashford. But first, I need to know, are you in a safe location? Can anyone overhear this conversation?" Safe location. The question sent chills down my spine. "I'm in my apartment, alone." "All right, Ms. Mitchell, I've reviewed the materials you sent, the photographs of the contracts and documents. I need to verify some information. Are you currently employed by Titanium Global?" "No," I said. "I was fired on Friday. They made me sign an NDA." There was a sound like she was writing something down. "Did they know you'd found evidence of the bribery scheme?" "Yes, I confronted the CEO. He shredded my compliance file, the physical file I'd put together documenting everything." More writing. "He destroyed evidence in front of you." "Yes." "Who else was present?" I told her. "Richard, Marcus Chen, the head of legal, the security consultant whose name I'd never learned." "Ms. Mitchell, what you've sent us is significant, very significant. But I need more than just photographs to move forward. I need your cooperation, your testimony. I need you to walk me through everything you found, how you found it, and what happened when you reported it. Are you willing to do that?" Was I willing? This was it, the point of no return. If I cooperated with the FBI, Richard would know I'd violated the NDA. He'd sue me. He'd try to destroy me. But if I didn't cooperate, all of this would be for nothing. "I'm willing," I said. "But I need protection, legal protection. The NDA I signed has a $5 million penalty clause." "We can protect you," Agent Torres said. If you're cooperating with a federal investigation, that NDA isn't worth the paper it's printed on. You can't be legally bound to conceal evidence of federal crimes. We'll provide you with a letter confirming you're assisting in an active investigation. That should shield you from civil liability. But I'm not going to lie to you, Ms. Mitchell. This won't be easy. You're going to be going up against a man with enormous resources. He's going to fight back. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Richard's face as he shredded my file. The arrogance, the certainty that he was untouchable. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. Good, I need you to come to our office tomorrow. Bring any evidence you still have. Any documents, emails, anything related to Titanium Global. Don't tell anyone you're coming. Don't post on social media. Don't mention this to friends or family. The fewer people who know, the safer you are. Understand? Safer, that word hit me. I hadn't really processed that I might be in actual danger. Richard was a billionaire with connections. If he found out I was talking to the FBI, what would he do? I understand, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. She gave me an address. A time. 10 a.m. Wednesday, Federal Plaza. Ask for her at the security desk. After I hung up, I sat there shaking. This was real. This was actually happening. The FBI was investigating Richard Ashford, and I was their witness, their informant. The person who'd blown the whistle on one of the most powerful men in American finance. I felt terrified and exhilarated at the same time, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump, not knowing if I'd fly or fall. That night I backed up everything again. Every photo, every note. I made copies and hid them in different places. One flash drive went in my apartment, hidden inside a box of tampons in my bathroom because I'd read somewhere that's the last place anyone looks. Another went to a safe deposit box I opened at a bank across town. I uploaded everything to an encrypted cloud service. If something happened to me, the evidence would survive. Wednesday morning, I dressed carefully, professional but not too formal. I took the subway to Federal Plaza and stood outside for a moment, looking up at the building. Once I walked in there, everything would change. There'd be no going back, no reconciliation, no quiet exit. I'd be at war with Richard Ashford, with Titanium Global, with everyone who had a stake in keeping those crimes hidden. I walked inside, showed my ID at security, asked for agent tours. 10 minutes later, she came down to get me. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything about me in a single glance. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming, follow me. She led me through security, up an elevator, down a hallway that looked like every government building ever. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors. We went into a conference room. There was another agent there. Older, male. This is Agent Robert Hammond, Torres said. He's the lead investigator on financial crimes. We'll both be working with you. We sat down. They offered me coffee. I accepted, needing something to do with my hands. And then they started asking questions, detailed questions. They wanted to know everything. When I started at Titanium Global, what my responsibilities were, when I first encountered the Helix consulting payment, what Richard had said to me, exact words if I could remember them. I walked them through all of it, finding the files in the basement, taking the photographs, the confrontation in Richard's office, the shredding of my compliance file. They took notes, recorded everything, asked follow-up questions that showed they understood corporate finance and federal law much better than I'd expected. How many shell companies did you identify? Agent Hammond asked. At least 15, I said. Maybe more. Each one received payments ranging from $1 to $3 million. The contracts were all similar. Vague language about regulatory facilitation and advisory services. But when you read between the lines, it was clearly describing bribes. And these contracts were signed by Ashford directly. Everyone I saw had his signature. Torres and Hammond exchanged a look. Ms. Mitchell, do you know if anyone else at Titanium Global was aware of these arrangements? I thought about Marcus Chen, about the other executives. The head of legal had to know. He was in Richard's office when I was confronted, and I think some of the senior deal team members must have known. These payments were going out on transactions they were managing. But I don't have proof of who knew what. We talked for 3 hours. They asked me to go through the photographs I'd taken, identifying each document, explaining what it meant, how it fit into the broader scheme. I could see them getting more focused, more intense. This wasn't just a preliminary inquiry anymore. This was the beginning of a real investigation. Finally, Agent Torres sat back. Okay, here's where we are. What you've provided gives us probable cause to open a formal investigation. We're going to need to verify the documents, obtain originals if possible, talk to other potential witnesses. This is going to take time. Months, maybe longer. During that time, we need you to keep a low profile. Don't contact anyone from Titanium Global. Don't discuss this investigation with anyone outside this room. Can you do that? What about finding a new job? I asked. I have bills, rent. I can't just sit around for months. We understand, Agent Hammond said. You should look for work, but be careful. If Ashford's people reach out to you, if anyone from the company contacts you, you let us know immediately. Don't engage, don't respond, just inform us. They gave me a letter on official FBI letterhead. It stated that I was cooperating with an ongoing federal investigation and that any attempt to enforce non-disclosure agreements against me in relation to that investigation would constitute obstruction of justice. My shield, my protection. I folded it carefully and put it in my purse. As I was leaving, Agent Torres walked me to the elevator. Ms. Mitchell, she said quietly, what you're doing takes courage. A lot of people in your position would have walked away, taken the severance and kept quiet. The fact that you didn't, that you came forward even knowing the risks, that matters. I want you to know that. Her words made my eyes sting with tears I refused to let fall. I just want to do the right thing, I said. She nodded. The right thing is usually the hardest thing, but it's worth it. We're going to get him, I promise you that. I left Federal Plaza feeling different than when I'd arrived. Lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a boulder and had finally set it down. I wasn't alone anymore. The FBI was investigating. Richard Ashford's days of operating above the law were numbered. Justice was coming. Of course, I had no idea how long it would actually take, how frustrating the process would be, how many times I'd doubt whether anything would actually happen. The federal government moves slowly, deliberately, building cases that can withstand armies of defense lawyers. I'd given them the foundation, but they needed to build the entire structure, and that took time. The first month was the hardest. I applied for jobs and got nowhere. A few companies brought me in for interviews, but as soon as they called Titanium Global for references, I never heard back. Richard had poisoned the well, made sure I was unhireable. I started burning through my severance money. Rent, utilities, student loans, groceries. It added up faster than I'd expected. I also started noticing things. Strange things. Like the same car parked on my street multiple days in a row. A man in a coffee shop who seemed to be watching me. My apartment building's front door being ajar when I was sure I'd closed it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress was making me see threats that weren't there. But I called Agent Torres anyway. We'll look into it, she said. But Sarah, it's possible Ashford has hired people to keep tabs on you. Private investigators, it's a common intimidation tactic. They want you to know you're being watched, to make you scared. Don't let it work. Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one being followed. But I tried to stay strong. I changed my routines, took different routes, kept my doors locked, looked over my shoulder. 2 months after my first meeting with the FBI, Agent Torres called. We've made progress. We executed a search warrant on Titanium Global's offices, seized computers, files, including the records room where you found the original documents. We've also started interviewing current and former employees, building a timeline, identifying accomplices. Did you find the box? I asked. The unmarked one with all the contracts? We found a box matching your description, but it was empty. Someone had cleaned it out. Probably after you were fired, they must have realized you'd accessed it. My heart sank. So the physical evidence is gone. The contracts you saw are gone, but we have your photographs, your testimony, and we're finding other evidence. Financial records, wire transfers, email communications. We're building a case, Sarah. It's just going to take time. Time? That was the thing I didn't have. My severance was almost gone. I'd started working as a freelance bookkeeper for small businesses, making a fraction of what I'd earned before. I'd moved to a cheaper apartment, cut every expense I could. My life had shrunk, become small and careful and afraid. But I held on to Agent Tor's words. We're building a case. They were working, investigating. Every day, they were getting closer to being able to charge Richard with his crimes. I just had to be patient, had to trust the process. 4 months after I'd first contacted the FBI, I got another call. This time from Agent Hammond. "Sarah, we need you to come in again. We're preparing to present the case to a grand jury. We need to go over your testimony. Make sure you're prepared for what's coming." Grand jury, that meant they were ready to seek an indictment, ready to formally charge Richard Ashford. "When?" I asked. "Next week. Can you make it Thursday afternoon?" I could make it. I would have canceled anything to make it. That Thursday, I went back to Federal Plaza. This time, there was a prosecutor with Tors and Hammond. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen. No relation to Marcus, he assured me with a slight smile. He was serious and intense, with the kind of focus that made you feel like you were the only person in the world when he looked at you. "Ms. Mitchell, we're going to bring charges against Richard Ashford for wire fraud, bribery of federal officials, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Your testimony is crucial to our case. The grand jury will hear from you directly. They'll see the evidence you provided. And if they agree there's probable cause, they'll issue an indictment. Do you understand the process?" I nodded. He walked me through what to expect, the questions I'd be asked, how to answer clearly and concisely, what not to say. Don't speculate, don't guess. If you don't know something, say you don't know. Only testify to what you personally saw and heard. Your credibility is everything. We rehearsed for hours, going over every detail of my story, every document I'd found, every conversation with Richard. By the time we finished, it was dark outside. "You're going to do great," Agent Tors said. "Just tell the truth, that's all you need to do." The grand jury testimony was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Those 2 weeks felt like 2 years. I barely slept, kept going over everything in my mind, making sure I had the facts straight, making sure I could tell the story clearly. This was my one chance to make the case, to convince 23 strangers that one of the most respected businessmen in America was actually a criminal. The day of the grand jury, I wore the same navy suit I'd worn to my interview at Titanium Global. It felt appropriate somehow, coming full circle. I went into that courthouse scared but determined. They led me to the grand jury room, 23 people sitting in rows, looking at me with curiosity. The prosecutor asked me to state my name, to swear to tell the truth. And then I told them everything. The whole story, finding the job posting, the interview, Richard's speech about integrity, finding the Helix consulting payment, being told to trust him, discovering the unmarked box, photographing the evidence, the confrontation, the shredding, everything. I spoke for over an hour. The grand jurors asked questions, good questions. How do you know the payments were bribes? Did anyone else see the documents? What happened to the original files? I answered as clearly as I could, stuck to the facts, didn't speculate. When it was over, they thanked me. I walked out of that room with no idea if I'd convinced them, if my testimony had been enough. 3 days later, Agent Tors called. I knew from her tone before she even said the words. The grand jury issued the indictment. All charges. Richard Ashford is going to be arrested tomorrow morning. I sat down on my couch, my legs suddenly weak. It's really happening. It's really happening. The FBI will execute the arrest warrant at his home at 6 a.m. We'll also be serving search warrants on his properties and office. This is going to be all over the news by tomorrow afternoon. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Tomorrow, Richard Ashford, billionaire CEO, was going to be arrested tomorrow, charged with federal crimes, facing decades in prison because I'd found evidence, because I'd refused to stay silent, because I'd cooperated with the FBI. "Sarah," Agent Tors said, "are you okay?" "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. "I'm okay, I can't believe it's finally happening." Believe it and prepare yourself. Once this goes public, there's going to be media attention. Reporters trying to find out who the whistleblower was. You should probably stay off social media. Don't answer calls from unknown numbers. And if anyone finds you, if any reporters contact you, refer them to our office. Don't make any statements. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed watching the clock. 6 a.m. That's when they'd arrest him. I pictured FBI agents showing up at his mansion, the shock on his face, the humiliation of being handcuffed. Perp walked, charged like a common criminal. The man who'd destroyed my file, who'd threatened me, who'd thought he was untouchable, finding out that nobody is above the law. At 6:15 a.m., my phone started buzzing with news alerts. Billionaire CEO Richard Ashford arrested on federal corruption charges. Titanium Global Investments under FBI investigation. Massive bribery scheme uncovered at major investment firm. It was real. It was actually real. I turned on the news. Every channel was covering it. Footage of Richard being led out of his townhouse in handcuffs. His expensive suit. His shocked expression. FBI agents carrying boxes out of Titanium Global's offices. Reporters speculating about the scope of the investigation. Legal analysts saying this could be one of the biggest corporate corruption cases in years. And through it all, nobody mentioned my name. I was just a whistleblower inside the company. An unnamed source, protected, safe. I watched the coverage all day, unable to look away. This was justice, real justice, happening in real time. But it was also just the beginning, because now came the real fight, the trial. Richard's army of lawyers versus the federal government. My testimony would be public then. My name would come out. Everyone would know what I'd done. And Richard would fight with everything he had, because men like him don't go down quietly. They don't accept defeat. They burn everything to the ground rather than admit they were wrong. The war was just beginning, and I was right in the center of it.